Hello and welcome to another episode of Storytime from our channel, Post-Separation Abuse.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're diving into something today that I think a lot of you are going to find super interesting. It's all about how the things we experience way back in childhood can really affect our relationships as adults. And you know what? After going through that interview you sent me with Dr. Nicole LePera from the Jay Shetty podcast, well, let me just say, her insights are seriously mind-blowing.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much of how we relate to others is actually driven by things we're not even conscious of.
Right, and Dr. LePera talks about this iceberg analogy to explain.
Exactly. It's such a powerful way to think about it.
So break it down for us, what's lurking beneath the surface, so to speak.
Okay, so imagine an iceberg, right? You only see the tip, which represents like our conscious actions, the choices we make, all that stuff.
Gotcha.
But the huge part that's hidden underwater, that's our subconscious mind, and that's where all these beliefs and patterns and, yeah, even some unresolved issues from our childhood are hanging out.
And that's what's really calling the shots when it comes to how we connect with other people.
You got it. It's like our subconscious is the captain steering the ship, even when we think we're in control.
This makes so much sense. It's like we can have the best intentions, but then our subconscious is like, nope, not going to happen.
Exactly. And Dr. LePera actually tells this really relatable story about how she reacted to something totally ordinary. Undone dishes.
Delicious. Okay, you've got my attention.
So she realizes that her crazy frustration wasn't actually about the mess itself. It was triggering this deeper feeling of not feeling seen or cared for, which she traced back to her childhood.
Wow, I bet a lot of people listening right now can relate to that. It's like those little things that just push your buttons and you're left wondering, where did that come from?
And that's exactly why understanding how our subconscious works is so important. Because when we're not aware of this connection between our past and present, we can end up feeling confused and frustrated and even ashamed of our own reactions.
Okay, so let's get into some concrete examples of how childhood experiences can pop up in our adult relationships. Dr. LePera talks about how the way we express emotions as adults is heavily influenced by how freely we were allowed to express them as kids.
Right. Think about it. If you were always told to toughen up or hide your feelings as a kid, you might find it really hard to express and process emotions in a healthy way in your relationships as an adult.
Makes sense. I guess it could go the other way too, right? If you didn't learn healthy ways to manage your emotions, you might end up overreacting to certain situations.
Absolutely. It's not just about expressing emotions. It's also about the roles we tend to play in relationships. Maybe you were the classic overachiever growing up, always trying to get approval from others.
You become a total people pleaser, even if it means sacrificing your own needs along the way. It's like that role just becomes a part of who you are.
Exactly. And even if it helped you achieve things, it might also leave you feeling empty inside because you've lost touch with your true self.
Speaking of losing touch, Jay Shetty actually shared a personal story in the podcast that really resonated with me. He talked about how he used to get heart palpitations as a child, but the doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong.
And that led him to ignore those physical sensations for years, basically disconnecting from what his body was trying to tell him.
Which Dr. LePera points out is a super common coping mechanism. When emotions get too intense, we learn to avoid those physical feelings that come with them.
It's like we go numb to protect ourselves. But by doing that, we lose this crucial connection to ourselves, which makes it even harder to connect deeply with others.
It really makes you think about how many of us are walking around disconnected from our bodies without even realizing it.
And it raises this important question. How can we build healthy, loving relationships if we're not even connected to ourselves? And it starts by building a strong foundation within ourselves, which means reconnecting with our bodies, understanding our emotions, and uncovering those subconscious patterns that are driving our behaviors.
And one of the most common patterns Dr. LePera talks about is how people who grew up in chaotic environments often recreate that chaos in their adult relationships.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, right? Why would we seek out what's familiar, even if it's not good for us?
I guess because our nervous systems get wired for that kind of stress and drama. Even though it's painful, it feels predictable on some level.
It goes back to that iceberg analogy. We're drawn to what feels familiar, even if it's unhealthy deep down.
So how does this all tie in with what Dr. LePera calls trauma bonds?
Well, the term trauma bond has kind of expanded beyond its original clinical definition, which usually refer to those really intense, abusive relationships.
Right. It seems like it now includes any kind of dysfunctional relationship pattern that's rooted in those early experiences.
Exactly. And here's the really fascinating part. Trauma bonds can actually be the basis of attraction. We might be subconsciously attracted to people who trigger those familiar, even if unhealthy, dynamics from our past.
So it's like we're trying to replay and heal those old wounds, but often we just end up repeating the same patterns.
That's the danger, and that's why Dr. LePera talks about this idea of inner child work as a way to start breaking free from these cycles.
Okay, so tell me more about this inner child. Who exactly are we talking about here?
Think of it as the part of you that's still holding on to those unmet needs, those adapted behaviors, those little hurts from your childhood. It's like a younger version of yourself who's still longing for love, security, and acceptance.
And often we try to meet those needs in unhealthy ways, like constantly seeking validation from others or overachieving to feel worthy.
Exactly, but real healing comes from creating that sense of safety and security within ourselves. It's about learning to meet our own needs in healthy ways, practicing self-care, and becoming more aware of our emotions.
This is where Dr. LePera talks about those 7 common roles we develop in childhood, right? Like the caretaker, the overachiever, the underachiever, the rescuer.
Yes. And there's also the protector, the life of the party, the yes person, and the hero worshiper. She makes this really important point that even when these roles lead to success on the outside, they can leave us feeling empty and disconnected on the inside because we've lost touch with who we really are beneath those masks.
It's like we've become so used to playing a part that we've forgotten our true selves.
And that's why the process of reconciliation is so important, which involves shedding those roles, becoming aware of them, grieving the circumstances that led us to create them, and finding the courage to make new choices.
This is all really powerful stuff, but I'm wondering how we actually start to rewire those deeply ingrained negative beliefs from childhood. Dr. LePera has a 3-step approach, right?
She does. First, you got to become aware of the belief when it pops up. Just notice it without judgment.
Okay, so don't dwell on it. Got it. What's next?
Next, shift your focus away from that negative belief. Don't give it center stage. Redirect your attention to something more positive, something that aligns with the truth you want to embrace.
And last but not least,
Take embodied action. This means acting in ways that contradict the belief, even if you don't fully believe it yet. It's about putting those new beliefs into practice through your actions.
I'm starting to see how powerful this can be.
Hmm?
By acting as if the truth we want to believe is already true, we're essentially retraining our brains and creating new neural pathways.
Exactly. It all comes back to Dr. LePera's central message. Our bodies play a huge role in shaping our thoughts, beliefs, and relationships. We need to pay more attention to those physical sensations, those stress responses, those habitual patterns we carry within us.
If any of this is hitting home for you and you're feeling inspired to take a closer look at your own relationship patterns, we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor, so don't go anywhere.
Visit the author website of Lorraine Kaling, lifechangeplans.com. Change your thinking and it will change your life.
Like we were saying, our bodies hold so much wisdom, but we often just tune them out completely.
So how do we start listening to those whispers again? How do we reconnect with what our bodies are trying to tell us?
It starts with paying attention, like really tuning into those subtle cues our bodies are constantly sending us.
Like what kinds of cues? Give us some examples.
Well, think about it. That tension in your shoulders, that knot in your stomach, that sudden racing heartbeat. Those are all signals that something needs our attention.
So instead of ignoring them or pushing them down or numbing ourselves out with distractions, we need to learn to tune in and respond with kindness and compassion.
Yeah, exactly. It's like becoming our own best friend, being there for ourselves in those moments.
I love that. It's about creating that sense of safety and grounding within our own bodies, first and foremost.
And when we feel safe and grounded in ourselves, that's when we can start to create safer, more grounded relationships with others.
This reminds me of something Dr. LePera talked about, how our internal world shapes our external reality.
Absolutely. It's all connected. Our thoughts, beliefs, those unresolved emotions we carry with us. It all shows up in our relationships and the experiences we attract into our lives.
It's a lot to process, but also really empowering when you think about it. We're not just victims of our circumstances.
Right. We have the power to heal, to grow, to create positive change. It's all there within us.
It's like we're finally taking the driver's seat in our own lives and our relationships.
I love that analogy. It's about taking ownership and responsibility for our own well-being. Speaking of insights, what really stuck with you from Dr. LePera's interview?
For me, it was the focus on the body as the foundation for healing and transformation. We spend so much time up in our heads overthinking and analyzing everything.
But our bodies hold the key. They store our experiences, our emotions, our wisdom. It's all right there.
It's like we've been searching for answers outside ourselves when the wisdom we need has been within us all along.
And once we tap into that wisdom, we can create some really amazing shifts in our lives and relationships.
It's like we're finally coming home to ourselves.
Exactly. And isn't that where true love and connection begin? With self-love and self-acceptance.
Absolutely. And Dr. LePera has a great website with tons of resources to help people on this journey of self-discovery.
I've heard wonderful things about her work.
Yes. And speaking of resources, we're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. When we come back, I'd love to hear what resonated most with you from this deep dive.
Discover more about the common post-separation abuse tactics by the author in her pen name, Lorraine Kaling. Post-separation abuse, betrayal, abandonment, what type of man? Lorraine writes her story to raise awareness of hidden forms of abuse and highlights the gaps in the laws after being advised to report gender violence in Spain, where she lives. She deals with the conflicting legal advice from solicitors at the end of a non-married relationship. She points out that older women in cohabiting relationships can often find themselves stuck with no real support. You can download the updated version for 2024 from Amazon as a paperback or as an ebook via Kindle.
Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, this conversation has been really eye-opening for me, thinking about how much those early experiences can shape our relationship patterns. It's definitely making me rethink a few things in my own life. What about you? What really stuck out to you from Dr. LePera's insights?
You know what really hit home for me was that even though those childhood experiences shape us, they don't have to define us. We always have the power to choose something different, to kind of rewrite our own story.
Yeah, it's like we're not stuck in the past.
Yeah.
We can heal and grow and change. And that's a really hopeful message, don't you think?
Absolutely. And Dr. LePera's work really highlights that we're not alone in this. So many people are dealing with similar struggles, wanting deeper connection, more fulfillment in their lives.
It's like we're all in this together. And by talking about it and supporting each other, we can create a more compassionate world for everyone.
I love that. It's about creating that sense of belonging and connection, not just in our own relationships, but in the world around us.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the hidden world of our subconscious minds and how those early experiences can affect our relationships today. It's amazing how much we can learn by exploring these connections.
Dr. LePera's work gives us such a powerful way to understand ourselves and create healthier, more fulfilling relationships. And for anyone who wants to learn more, her website is an incredible resource.
Right, definitely go check that out.
Yeah.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this journey of self-discovery.
Yeah.
Until next time, happy exploring.